So what we have seen so far in first lecture where we started our whole genome editing class. So basically we saw in the first lecture that how the field actually developed, and this was developed by Mr. Paul Berg, where he created this recombinant DNA. So he used one E. coli DNA as well as second phage DNA. And his intention was to express phages in E. coli, and his also intention was to express E. coli gene into mammalian expression system or mammalian cells. So with this intention, he created his recombinant DNA. And later in his experiments, he also used phage vectors. So if this is the phage vector, it has some kind of early genes and it has late genes, right? So he was able to deconstruct these two into two parts, where you have one construct where it can only express early gene, or other construct where it can only express late genes. And if you have early gene in the helper cells, then the late gene is destroyed here, that is, it is not functional. And in early gene, you have the cloning strategy. So gene of interest can be cloned in early genes. That means this is destroyed, but it can be supplemented with the help of helper cells. So this was his strategy. And with this, he was actually at the end, he was successful in expressing lot of proteins starting from beta globin to other kind of genes. So this was our first lecture. Then in the first lecture, we also saw mainly about restriction enzyme, and we focused mainly on type 2 restriction enzyme. Why? Because type 2 consists of mostly 90% of the enzyme, and we mainly work with type 2 enzyme. And basically we saw in type 2 enzyme, we also have classification starting from type 2p, type 2s, and other enzyme. So basically FOC1 comes into type 2S, and that is why we saw initially the type 2 restriction enzyme. So this was basically the gist of first lecture. Okay, now coming to the second lecture. So what was the main thing we saw in second lecture? That the group Kanazawa and Suzisaki from Japan, they isolated this culture, and they were able to purify this bacteria, Flavobacterium, and from this they were able to purify the proteins. And after purifying the proteins, they were able to map this according to their cleavage site. So this is the mapping site shown here, and the mapped fragments. So if you incubate this with the phage DNA, then it cleaves into several fragments. So fragments were named as F1 to H7, and these fragments, first to 6, were further subdivided into several parts using different kind of restriction enzyme as shown here. So using this restriction enzymes, it was cleaved further into small pieces so that it is feasible to perform the maximum Gilbert sequencing assays. So maximum Gilbert sequencing assays gives you the proper sequencing from the 5' site of the base. So after analysis of the 5' site, this group was able to show that the enzyme, FOC1 enzyme, has a 5' recognition domain. For example, you have GGG80 and GG80G sequence. This is the recognition sequence, and it cleaves further downstream at around 9 and 13 base pairs. So this is what we see. And if you have the cleavage, then you also have 4 nucleotides overhang produced by this enzyme. So after this, they were also able to say that there is no specific cleavage by FOC1 enzyme. That means this can cleave after thymidine, it can also cleave after adenine sequences, and so on. Furthermore, they were able to pinpoint the pentameric sequences and they were also able to confirm this mode of cleavage. So these things were actually done by second lecture, what we saw in second lecture, but by that time we don't know the details that how this FOC1 enzyme is cleaving in molecular sense. So after that we turn into lecture 3. So in lecture 3, basically we performed trypsin kind of cleavage studies. So basically trypsin kind of cleavage studies, it actually cleaves after lysine, or you have arginine. So if you do a time course experiment, that means if you incubate over the time, then you have different kind of cleavage activity performed, and then you get different kinds of bands. So based on that, you can know that how your proteins are cleaved into different fragments. And I will come to this again in my question answer session. So for example, this is just one figure, and this is oversimplified figure of any kind of protein. For example, you have a protein which is folded something like this. You have A part, you have B part, and you have C and D part. Now, wherever the cleavage is happening is shown by your cut site. So these are the cut site. For example, these proteins are treated by proteolysis. In our case, we have treated it with trypsin, right? So if you cleave this whole protein with the trypsin, that means you are getting different digest fragments. You are getting 4 fragments, basically A, B, C, and D. So these fragments are produced after trypsin cleavage. For example, we will take trypsin, and when you do a mass spectroscopy analysis, then you get A, B, C, D fragments, and basically you can identify like what kind of fragments are giving you what kind of result. For example, sequencing also you can do with the help of various tag labeling. So all this can be done. So basically sequencing you can get from these kind of assay. Now, if you have the same protein which are bound by DNA, I will show DNA like this. So which are bound by DNA, then you can imagine that some sites are bound by your DNA and some cleavage site are protected by your DNA. And in this case, the DNA binding site is shown between B and C fragment, and that is why the cleavage fragment here, which should be cleaved here, it's not cleaved by this trypsin analysis or proteolysis treatment. And in this case, then you will get only A fragment, B and C fragment together. This is a bigger fragment. And then you have third fragment, which is D fragment. And again, with the help of mass spec analysis, you get this is your A fragment, this is your second D fragment, and the biggest fragment will come later during the time point, that is the heaviest fragment which is coming out here. So with this kind of trypsin analysis, you have certain kind of knowledge, not accurate knowledge, and this is very simplified version, I've already said. So that means you can already predict that your DNA is binding somehow to this region between B and C. This is why you do a trypsin analysis with and without DNA. Okay, so this is what we have seen. Now, once you have this kind of fragments produced, you can perform N-terminal sequencing. And with the N-terminal sequencing, it was found that when it is not bound with the DNA, it gives you 2 fragments as shown here. And if it is bound with the DNA, it gives you 41 kilodalton basically, and for 25 kilodalton. This is with DNA fragments. So these are the major fragments what you are getting. And the sequences are also written here. The N-terminal sequencing with the help of Edman reaction or any Sanger sequencing, you can get this sequences of the N-terminal region of your proteins. So this was the major thing we saw in our lecture third. And on top of that, we also saw which part of the terminal, whether it is N or the C terminal, is binding to your sequences or binding to oligo DT sequence. This is generally done to see whether it is binding to the DNA as such. So when this kind of analysis was done, it was found that the 41 kilodalton was retained inside the oligo DT column, whereas you have flow through, which gives you 25 kilodalton fragment. And this was also shown in terms of trypsin analysis. And here you do not have the 25 kilodalton, which is not retained, and you have retaining of the 41 and 30 kilodalton. So this was also we saw in our lecture. And then their question was, which of these two fragments are actually binding to the DNA specifically? And second question was, which of these two fragments are cleaving your DNA specifically? So where this two activity resides. So for that they performed this cleavage property analysis, and for this they used a substrate called plasmid TZ19R. And as you can see here, this is the plasmid incubated with the FOC1 enzymes, gives you different kinds of fragments as you can see here. And then if you incubate with the proteins of N-terminus domain, it does not cleave any of your plasmid DNA. That means the cleavage property is not there in your N-terminal part. Whereas if you incubate it with the C-terminus part, you see the cleavage of your domain. So that means the cleavage property is there in the 25 kilodalton small pieces that is written there. And further, they also took the advantage of sequencing again. They also took out this fragment and they went on that what are the fragments which comes up after the sequencing. Now, most importantly, next, they wanted to see whether these N-terminal part is binding to any oligonucleotide or it is binding to very specific region of the DNA. And for that, they did some kind of gel mobility shift assays where they incubated with your oligonucleotides and together with your specific probe. That means this specific probe will have your GG, ATG specific recognition site for your FOC1 enzyme. And this is non-specific DNA. That means it does not have any recognition site for your FOC1 enzyme. And what you see in this kind of assays when it is done, that only 41 kilodalton forms a specific oligomeric sequences. That means you have DNA protein complexes formed when you have sequence specific recognition site. That means your FOC1 enzyme is recognizing DNA very specifically and only when you have the specific probe present in it. So this was the part of lecture 3. And now further if you move forward, then again the mutation analysis were done in lecture 4 and they tried to form the reconstitution assay. What is reconstitution assay? That you have certain proteins in your in vitro experiments. These proteins are joined together and then it is seen whether it is really binding to the oligonucleotides or not. So in this kind of assay, they were able to show that 30 kilobases or 30 kilodalton fragment were not binding to any of the oligonucleotides here, but the full length N-terminal, that is 41, binds and forms the complex. Similarly, if you reconstitute both part, that means 30 plus 11 kilodalton, that means you have again forming of the oligonucleotide. And further, they purified the proteins from these two and they were able to say that you get specifically 41 from this lane and 30 and 11 kilodalton protein from this lane 5. So this was shown in the next paper. Then again the cleavage property they were able to show here, that if the FOC1 is pre-incubated with 30 and 11 kilodalton, that means these two, and you can imagine if you have a DNA and this is the FOC1 binding site, that means 30 and 11 can reconstitute and bind to the recognition site. And this recognition site is not available if you top up this with another FOC1 wild type. So if you already have this enzyme, that means you do not see any cleavage for this protein. Whereas if you incubate it with normal wild type protein, then this plasmid is cleaved further into pieces as you can see here. Whereas if it is pre-incubated and then it is stopped with FOC1 enzyme, then you do not see any cleavage. So that means it is inhibiting the binding of the wild type enzyme. Similarly, here they did as a control experiment where you pre-incubate this 30 and 11 kilodalton, and on top of that, you also add HINF1 enzyme which is able to cleave this. That means there is no FOC1 binding site which is restricted for HINF1. So it is binding and then cleaving to its particular site. So this was the main outcome of our lecture. And further, they also tested with this footprinting assays. So in footprinting assays, they did on both strands. For example, this is your top strand and this is your bottom strand. In the bottom strand, they were able to show that you have a clear protection of the sequence what is corresponding to your recognition sequence. So this part is totally protected for wild type as well as your this mutant which is your 41 kilodalton in increasing amount. And similarly you can see for the top strand you have protection to this sequences as shown here in both cases. So these was the outcome of the footprinting assays. And the sites were also shown here. So this is the total protection at this site and some protection at these groups. Now further, there was one other paper where they said that only one point mutation will decouple two regions. That means recognition domain as well as the cleavage domain. And what they did here, based on the sequence similarity of ECO-R1 and ECO-R5 with FOC1 enzyme, they were able to figure out what are the active site, and basically they mutated this aspartic acid and they also mutate aspartic acid at 467 position. So after mutating these two position, they were able to show that there is no cleavage after you mutate this thing. This is one. So you do not see any cleavage. As you can see here, there is no cleavage at this position, whereas in the wild type, you see a proper cleavage at particular cleavage site. Whereas when you see the recognition site was easily protected from wild type, as well as all these mutants were able to protect the wild type or the recognition sequences, as you can see here. So these are the protection sites for the recognition sequences. So basically they were able to show the uncoupling of sequence specific DNA binding. So this is the part of that lecture. And then the third one, what we saw, insertion and deletion of mutants of FOC1 restriction enzyme. That means this is the linker domain they are talking about, and they either deleted some of the portion. For example, this is the wild type linker domain. You have KSEL site and EEK site prominently in this linker. And when you delete KSE site, that is your -4 amino acid, or when you delete further KSEL, EEK, that is -7. So these sites are deleted in this region. Or when you add some domains here, TAEL domain, that is addition of 4 nucleotides, or addition of 8 nucleotides to 2 times TAEL domain. So what you see here, and then they check the activity whether it is able to cleave your DNA or not. So in all these cases, whether you delete or whether you insert some of the amino acid, so these were easily tolerated in the structure. That means this structure is highly unstructured or maybe flexible. That is why you have a easily toleration. However, if you delete more than 7 amino acid, this was not tolerated and you do not get any cleavage activity. So this was shown in your insertion and deletion mutants. So this is the purification of these mutants. So this is -4 amino acid, what we have seen. This is wild type FOC1 enzyme. This is plus 4 amino acid, plus 8, plus 12. So these were all expressed properly, as you can see here. And when these expressed proteins were incubated with your plasmid TZ19R, then again you can see it cleaved properly, as this is the wild type cleavage. You can see if you minus this 4 amino acid, it is still able to cleave your plasmid, and even the incorporation of other amino acids up to 23 or 18 glycine serine rich domain, they were able to cleave your DNA uh, as per the wild type FOC1 enzyme. So these cleavage was comparable to your wild type FOC1 enzyme. So this was the part of our fourth lecture. Now coming to the structure of your FOC1 enzyme. So the first time Agarwal group showed the complete structure of FOC1 enzyme. Although this was the monomeric structure, they were able to capture it, and prominent details of the structure came from the crystals. So that means these were subdivided into three domains, D1, D2 and D3, and more prominently the cleavage domain as shown here. So the important point from these structure came that how these structures are making contacts with your loops, or with your D1 domain or with your D2 domain. For example, the prominent contacts in this case, D1 to DNA interactions, were on basically four subdomains. So here you have loop 2, which actually forms contacts with your glutamine to your G1. Then you have N-terminal arm. This is the N-terminal arm. You have glutamine as well as asparagine, which makes contact with your adenine sequences. And then loop 1 and alpha, which is the recognition sequence. This is alpha 6, which is forming a contact. So basically they are majorly forming contacts with the major groove, as you can see here, and there is a one contact between a minor groove from glutamine acid. So these were the molecular details what we get from the crystal structures. Then the second structure, that means D2 domain, is also contacting DNA, and basically they are contacting these two G nucleotides, and the contact is basically in the major groove, as you can see here, and there is some difference between the contacts. For example, D1 contact very much like helix turn helix loop, whereas D2 domains are tilted further and they are specifically making contact with these two nucleotides. So basically major group contacts. Now the most important information from the crystal structure was the position of cleavage domain, as I mentioned earlier, and that was first time one had seen that this cleavage domain is piggybacked on the recognition domain. So this is at the back side of the recognition domain, and it is not freely available. And when you compare the cleavage domain structure with the monomeric BAM H1 structure, so they are more or less similar. And with the similarity, they were able to formulate some of the cleavage or catalytic sites. And these catalytic sites was prominently shown as D450, D467 and lysine 467. So these are the major catalytic domains forming within the catalytic site. So this part we have seen. This is to show actually the major structure region of cleavage domain that is forming at the backside of the recognition domain. So this is what I want to mention here. And then there are a lot of electrostatic interactions between D1 domain and D3 domain, and majorly these interactions are also coming from linker segment and helices of cleavage domain. So these all were covered in our lecture 5. So in yesterday's talk, we saw for the first time that Agarwal group were able to capture dimeric structures of FOC1, and these dimers were basically formed because of the cleavage domain. So there is no interactions between recognition domain, but there is major interactions going on between alpha 4, alpha 5, and P1 and P2 loops, which are coming in the interaction loop, we can see. So basically, when we see these interactions, dimer interfaces are majorly formed with the alpha 4 of one monomer and alpha 4 of another FOC1 monomer. And specifically, the aspartic acid 483 forms a hydrogen bonding with the arginine 487, and here also arginine 487 forms the hydrogen bonds with the aspartic acid 483. So these two interactions are important for making your dimer formations. So this we have already seen, and this is important also in future classes because there is something called homodimer and heterodimer. So basically we will come to it when we will talk about zinc finger nucleases, because most of the sites were actually improved to favor the heterodimer formation. So we will come to that when we talk about zinc finger nucleases. Now, another paper on the same PNS journal was published where they biochemically showed that when you have some kind of mutant enzyme, for example, these two mutants contain your uh, cleavage domain. For example, this is the rupture of the recognition domain is not present. Here only cleavage domain is present, and here cleavage domain is present, but it is mutated. That means the cleavage domain is not active. So when you construct these three kinds of mutants and then you check the cleavage property in the presence and absence of normal FOC1 enzyme, what you see here is this kind of picture. That means only in the supplementation assays, for example, individually they are not able to produce any products here. There is no product because they are catalytically inactive, all these three mutants. But FOC1 by itself is able to produce products in small amount, and this small amount is favored by the interaction with the cleavage domain. So in this case, when you add mutant FOC1 enzyme, then you have increment in the cleavage products. As you can see here, this is also increased in cleavage product, and whereas when your cleavage domain is inactive, then you do not see any increase in the cleavage activity. So this is what they produce, and from this result they say that two cleavage domains are important, or the dimer formations of FOC1 enzyme, specifically at the catalytic domain or the cleavage site, is important. So dimer formation of FOC1 is important for the cleaving of day. Further, we also saw that when you mutate aspartic acid into alanine and also arginine into alanine, so one can reduce the cleavage activity just by mutating these two amino acid, and then you have the no formation of the dimer is not there, and then you reduce some kind of activity. So this was shown with the help of supercoiled DNA, and this supercoiled DNA has the cleavage site or recognition site in this case, whereas there is no recognition site in this case, and that is why this kind of DNA is acting as a control. And in this mutant, you do not see any linear products, whereas in the final assay, you see from coil-coil structure to linear product, whereas the major product from this kind of assay was your open coiled structure. So from this assay, they said that when you mutate these enzymes, specifically as these two domains, dimers are not formed, but some kind of activity is still there, but you have reduced cleavage activity. So with this whole thing, they came up with the dimer model, and they say that FOC1 first bind to the DNA as a monomer, and this monomer is inactive. So the second FOC1 monomer arrives, and only when it arrives in the correct orientation, when the first one is scanning the whole DNA, the monomer collides here, and after collision they form a correct orientation dimer formation, and after dimer formation you have the cleavage of the double standard DNA in the presence of magnesium, and then they are again they goes back and they go back in their proper orientation back to the position. So this is so other papers, they have also done some kind of experiment there. You have the cleavage of this site when you also incorporate some of the, for example, you have cleavage after 13 nucleotides, and then you want to refill this cleavage site. So that means if you have joined this cleavage site, then they also see that this joint was also recleaved by your FOC1 enzyme. That means this, if the enzyme is bound to the recognition site, they will come and then they will cleave again to this reformed sites. Now coming to the lecture 7, which was very interesting because how EPOC1 enzyme can be used for our own purpose. And for this, they utilized the ultrathorax gene actually from Drosophila. And this gene was already known to bind a specific sequences, and these sequences were predicted as TTAA, TGG, and CC. So these are the sites where it binds in the DNA, and basically by linking with the FOC1 cleavage domain, they were able to target this hybrid enzyme into the proper location. So they first purified this protein over different columns, and after purification they constructed DNA substrate, and for that they incorporated 31 bases, and this 31 bases has the recognition sequence for UBX1, UBX site, and this is the incorporation of 9 bases inside this 31 base pair. So this is what they incorporated, and they incorporated in either one place or for 2 times or 3 times, basically to increase the strength of binding. And now they perform the cleavage assays. So as you can see, when the substrate is binding only with the UBX enzyme or chimeric enzyme, then it cleaves into 4 fragments. So this is first, second, third, and fourth fragment. Whereas in the absence of chimeric enzyme, this is your linearized plasmid. There is no fragment coming up in anywhere here. So when you increase the binding site, for example, this is one binding site, 2 and 3, then you are expected to see some kind of fragments coming up at this position, and this position, and here at this position. So similarly, with the increase of binding site, you see increase in the fragments coming at 1.9 as well as 0.9 position. So that means one can actually use FOC1 cleavage domain and link it to any sequences of our preference to actually have site specific cleavage. And in editing, what we want our specific DNA to be cleaved, and once it is cleaved, you can actually go further and replace it with our own specific DNA or own specific nucleotides, so to say. So this experiments were done, and this was the footprint in the whole journal that this kind of chimeric designers or design artificial enzymes are possible with the help of FOC1 enzyme to be created, so that one can use this natural occurring restriction enzyme for our own advantage and to specifically site exactly at where we want to cleave the DNA. So after showing that one can actually construct artificial DNA, although it doesn't behave exactly as your natural one, and the efficiency is much low in this case, we'll come to that point later. But they were able to show that this is possible to create any nucleases with our own site-specific cleavage activity. And after that, they also checked that where exactly they are cleaving. So they were able to find with the help of printing or maximum Gilbert sequencing assay that on top strand it is cleaving at exactly 3 nucleotides away from the recognition sequence, and in the bottom strand they're cleaving at different sites 8, 9, 10, and they were able to show as a map that this is the third nucleotide, and this is 8, 9, and 10 nucleotides sequences. So far we have covered this much in our all lecture. So finally they were able to create artificial restriction enzyme, and this is what we want to actually study, that what are the tools what we can use for our own purpose, and how you can actually use this natural occurring system to mutate or to create a designer enzymes or to site specific cleavage, and that is what we want to actually want to study. So with this I am done for today's class, and then I will now ask questions or ready to take questions from all of you. So if you have questions you can raise hands. Yes, Chatanti Shri.
Um, in this lecture, we have said that they have tested whether FOC1 enzyme can recleave the oriented stretch of DNA.
Yes, in one of the papers I did not mention here, but it was shown from the authors that if you have double stranded DNA and if you have
Yes,
cleavage at
yes,
one position by FOC1 enzyme, and now
yes.
after cleavage if you refill those nucleotides, then the FOC1 is able to recleave it again. That means it is association and dissociation from the DNA from the recognition site is the time point how it is associating, if it is not dissociating fast, or if it is can come back again at that position and recleave at the same position again. So this is what I wanted to convey here.
So are they trying to establish this 3' to 5' nuclease activity here?
3' to 5' nucleus activity, why you are saying that?
Because it is coming back to the DNA and the site where like it already crossed once.
No, I wouldn't say like that. For example, I can say, mm, for example, if you have, you can imagine your DNA like this, and probably the recognition site is here, and then your enzyme is binding here, right? Then if it is exactly binding and is not dissociated from this position, then the cleavage enzyme is here. So you can imagine this is your cleavage domain. So if it is
Ma'am,
rotating, yes,
excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am, actually it's strucking, so I cannot like your slide is strucking. Ma'am.
my slide is stuck.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you see the movement?
No,
Uh,
no, ma'am,
Ma'am,
not yet.
I can see it.
Ma'am, to us we can see.
Chaitanya, I think there is some problem at your end. Other students can see it. The moment of in the slide, they can see.
Okay, ma'am. You just go on explaining. I will try to understand.
Without seeing, I think it's difficult. So basically, what I'm saying, if you have the cleavage domain, and which is piggybacked on your recognition domain, right? And the cleavage site is not cleaved, then this cleavage domain will swing over to the over to the linker domain and come to the cleavage site together with the other cleavage domain from other enzyme. So if two things come together, they form dimer and they are able to cleave it. Maybe I will send you the paper where this thing was mentioned, and probably you are. I will also highlight that line where you will be able to read it and understand. And if you are not able to understand, you can contact me again. Is that okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Uh, any other question? So basically, I want to discuss few things. For example, Somik Pal. Are you present, Somik?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Somik, you asked me the question that during cloning, we are using linkers with blunt ends, and after ligation, we cut them with restriction enzyme. If the cutting site is also present in the insert DNA fragments, then question mark. So the question is not complete. So what you want to ask here?
Many times the insect presence also in the DNA fragment. So is there any solution to this problem?
Okay, so yes, I expected the same thing. So many times you cannot use the restriction enzyme what you want to use. This is your question, right? Because the same restriction enzyme is also present in the either vector or insert. So
Yes, ma'am.
in that case, the scenario is either you reduce the size and then use one restriction site and then you use second restriction site, or you hide that restriction site by another method, or the third thing is to change the cloning strategy altogether. And these days the problem doesn't arise because there are many tools you can directly get your gene of interest with modification in the restriction enzyme you want to clone. So this can be easily over you can easily uh, uh, sh- get the solution of this question. So there is partial you have this molecular cloning by this, what is that book clone? Cloning kind of Sam Brook book. So which is the Bible of molecular cloning. You should get that hold of that book and then try to read that in especially the cloning section. Yeah. Then there was one question from. Am I clear, Somik? Is it okay?
Okay, ma'am. Fine.
Yeah. Um There is one question by Prabir Kumar Das. Are you present, Prabir?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the question is why there is two digestion pattern uh, with or without DNA. This was your question?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, two different digestion pattern, presence and absence.
You have two different digestion pattern. Yes. So if I showed you today's in lecture, especially for the
Yes,
trypsin analysis, some part is clear already?
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I have the second question also.
Yes. So second question is why there's not complete digestion, or why that 25 kilodalton fragment is not there in the without DNA, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So if we go back to the structure, I don't know if I have it here or not. Uh, I don't think it is here. Let me see. The structure is not here. Let me. Lecture. So I will just give you some explanation on for this. Okay. So basically what happens? So what you have here is total trypsin digestion. So for example, uh, you have one amino acid, two you have 578 amino acid. So without any DNA, this is cleaved into 8 kilodalton, and second you have a cleavage of 58 kilodalton structure, right? So that means this portion is not protected. Okay, so this portion is not protected, whereas in the case of same amino acid 12578, you have in the presence of DNA, you get first 41 kilodalton and second you get 25 kilodalton, right? So that means this domain which was not protected here in this case, right? So this is protected by the DNA. This is protected by the DNA. That is why there is no cleavage at this side. So you are not getting 5 and 8. So this is why you are getting a bigger fragment. Now the second question comes that why this 25 kilodalton is only in this uh, presence of DNA and not in the absence of DNA. Then you have to think that all the time trypsin is not digesting entirely to the mark, and sometimes it can happen that some of the sites, for example, if you go on checking the sequence, so for example the sequence for 8 terminal is exactly after it is cleaved after arginine sequences, and here these two are cleaved after lysine sequences, right? So you check the sequences and see that where exactly they are cutting, and in this case probably this site is not accessible for the trypsin digestion. So this is what my explanation would be. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So another important question, what I found it very interesting, Sayanti, Sayanti Mukhopadhyay, are you present?
Yes, ma'am.
Sayanti,
Shayantoni maybe.
Shayantani, okay. So your question was what is retroregulator stem loop sequence and why it is used to yield FOC1
Yes,
restriction enzyme, right? So I am happy to receive this question
yes,
because this is very typical question and very pertinent to the purification especially. So if you remember from the translation lectures, that most important part of the any translation is the formation of pre-initiation complexes, right? So what is pre-initiation complex? You have studied this part, Shwayanti?
sorry, ma'am.
Have you studied the
What
translation
did you
part?
ask? Can you please repeat?
Yes. Have you studied translation
No,
of
ma'am, no.
bacterial? You have not studied. Okay. But do you know pre-initiation complex?
Yes, ma'am.
So most important part for any bacterial proteins to be formed is formation of pre-initiation complex. So what is pre-initiation complex? You have 30S, you have 30S ribosomal part, then you have mRNA. For example, if I am preparing this here, mRNA, and at the same time you have cognate tRNA. So I'm preparing here a tRNA, cognate tRNA. That means it is bringing your F-methionine, first methionine together. So that means it is this whole thing is called pre-initiation complex, and that is the most limiting step. That means if this step is formed, then there is a chances of formation of your proteins. So many times what happens that you have Steindl-Nagano sequences, and after that you have can you switch off your mic, Shayanti, because it is causing some disturbance.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So once you have Steindl-Nagano sequence here, and then you have AUG sequence, that is the start of your methionine, and then you have gene specific mRNA sequences. But what happens in some cases, and what you see here, that the gene specific mRNA sequences can form secondary structure, and by forming secondary structure, actually it inhibits the start site. For example, Stein-Dargano sequences, which are regulatory sequences, they're hindered by the secondary sequences, which is formed because of, and many times these kind of mRNA in such cases do not give rise to any product. So this is the case, and when this is the case, you can overcome this situation by incorporating one kind of stem loop structure. So this is what they mean by stem loop, retrograde stem loop structure. So this stem loop, by incorporating this stem loop sequences, what you can see that all the secondary structures, they have distance is actually incorporated by incorporating stem loop, and then these secondary structure are not folded back, and these regulatory sequences, which is important for forming pre-initiation complex, for example 30s ribosomes will come here, mRNA is there, and then you have first tRNA coming at this site. So that means ribosome binding site is accessible in this case, and these are the specific sequences which are shown of the stem loop sequences, right? So this is your question, and these are the oligos which are shown that can be used for, you know, mapping where the stem loop is present. So this was your question and the answer for your stem loop. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, ma'am. That means it's structurally actually helping to increase the yield, right?
It is basically by forming the initiation complex. I request you to actually read translation before anything. So first read the bacterial translation. What are the things required for initiation of any translation? Okay. So then you will understand better. Then your second question was pertaining to why there is a what was your second question was wrong actually when you say that there is a incorporation of trypsin digestion with magnesium chloride. So we do not do any trypsin digestion with magnesium chloride, but it was in the presence or absence of DNA. This I have already explained. Then your third question was in another research article, it was mentioned that a single amino acid substitution mutation at linker region leads to uncoupling. So here again, your question is wrong, Shayanti. There is no linker domain mutation. So if you see the title of that paper, so uncoupling is because of your mutation in the catalytic site. Okay, there is no mutation at the linker side if you remember the structure properly. So I will come to that paper. So this is the paper you are talking about, right? So here what they
Right,
did,
ma'am.
yes, this is the single amino acid change. So this single amino acid change they are making here exactly within the catalytic domain of your C-terminus domain. So this single amino acid mutation they are doing. They are not changing anything in the linker domain. So linker domain mutations come at this position. So this is uncoupling as shown here, and this uncoupling is because of the catalytic domain which is mutated. You got it? So and then linker was
Okay, ma'am.
okay, and linker was here. So linker is very well tolerated in all these experiments, whether you add or you delete some at least up to 4 amino acid, and you can incorporate up to 23 amino acid, and still you get the cleavage of the particular site. So I hope I am clear.
Mm. Yes, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We have just 1 minute to go. So if there are no further questions, then I would say thank you, and we will see you all on Saturday then. Yeah, same time.